David Clarke slammed his hand against a stranger's car hood and screamed not from anger, but from the gut-wrenching terror of watching a woman crumple onto the crosswalk like her bones had simply given up. Nobody stopped, not one person. Dozens of suits kept walking eyes down phones up the whole city, moving like she was just another piece of broken sidewalk. But David stopped. And that one decision made in 3 seconds on the worst day of his life would cost him everything he'd worked for. Or so he thought. What he didn't know was that the woman lying in that street was the key to his entire future. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The alarm didn't wake David Clarke on the morning of October 14th. He was already awake. He'd been lying in the dark since 4:47 a.m., staring at the water stain on the ceiling of his apartment, the one that had spread another 2 inches since August, and that his landlord Mr. Patel kept promising to fix. It looked like the shape of a hand now, reaching. David had decided a long time ago not to read too much into that. He turned his head and looked at the clock. 5:12 a.m. The interview was at 10 a.m. sharp. He had 4 hours and 48 minutes to become someone worth hiring. He sat up slowly, pressed both palms against his knees, and exhaled the way a man exhales when he's been holding his breath for 3 years. Because that's what it felt like, 3 years of holding his breath since Sarah died, since the medical bills arrived, since the savings disappeared, since the 2-bedroom house they'd shared became a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a radiator that clanged like someone beating a pipe at 3 a.m. 3 years of holding Lily together with both hands while quietly falling apart with everything else. He stood up, padded into the kitchen in his socks and filled the coffee maker. While it brewed, he stood at the narrow window that looked out over the parking lot below. A stray cat sat on top of a dumpster perfectly still, watching something David couldn't see. Lucky, he thought. Not much to lose. He'd found the job posting by accident, or maybe not. He'd been on his 3rd shift in 2 days at the warehouse off Route 9 running pallets at midnight when Marcus, the crew lead, had clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Yo, Clarke, you're too smart for this. You know that, right? You're too damn smart to be pulling pallet jacks at 47 cents above minimum." David had laughed it off the way he always did. "Smart doesn't pay rent, Marcus." No. Marcus had said serious, in a way he rarely was. But Sterling and Associates might. He'd pulled out his phone and shown David the posting right there in the warehouse, the glow of the screen blue against the concrete walls. Program Analyst Entry Level. Sterling and Associates. Competitive salary. Full benefits. Healthcare included. David had stared at that word healthcare for a full 10 seconds. He'd applied that same night, still in his warehouse clothes, sitting in his truck in the parking lot at 1:15 a.m., typing on his phone with grease-stained fingers. He'd stayed up until 3 a.m., rebuilding a resume he hadn't touched in years, pulling together every job, every certificate, every community college course he'd managed to squeeze in around work shifts and school pickups and parent-teacher conferences, and the 1,000 invisible things that filled a single father's days. He didn't tell Lily. He didn't want to get her hopes up. He hadn't fully gotten his own up either. Not yet. But when the email came, "We'd like to invite you for an interview," he'd sat in his truck on his lunch break and read it 4 times. Then he'd put the phone face down on the seat and pressed his forehead against the steering wheel and breathed. Healthcare, stable income, a real apartment, a future Lily could count on. He'd allowed himself exactly 60 seconds of hope. Then he'd put the truck in drive and gone back to work. The suit was borrowed. His neighbor Frank Delgado, a retired postal worker with a closet full of clothes he swore he'd fit into again someday, had offered it without hesitation when David knocked on his door and explained the situation. "Navy blue," Frank had said, holding it up. "That's a power color, son. Trust me. I wore that suit to my daughter's wedding, and every man in the room asked me who my tailor was. Frank, it's from Men's Warehouse circa 2009. And it still looks good. Put it on." It fit well enough. The shoulders were close. David had bought a new tie from the clearance rack at Target, dark red conservative, and his dress shoes were old but polished to a shine. He'd worked at for 20 minutes the night before, Lily sitting cross-legged on the bathroom floor watching him with that quiet, attentive look she had. "You look like a businessman, Daddy," she'd said. Yeah. She'd tilted her head. "Do businessmen get nervous?" He'd set down the shoe brush. "All the time, baby." "Then you'll fit right in." He'd laughed a real one, full and easy, and she'd grinned, proud of herself. 8 years old, and already knowing exactly how to crack him open. He dropped Lily at school at 7:55 a.m., walked her to the front door the way he always did, crouched down to her level. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. She had his eyes, dark brown, steady, and her mother's stubborn chin. She was wearing her favorite jacket, the yellow one with the hood shaped like a duck's bill, and her backpack was almost as big as she was. "You nervous?" she asked him. "Not even a little." He lied. She gave him a look that said she knew exactly what that was. Then she hugged him, arms around his neck tight, and whispered in his ear, "You're gonna get it, Daddy. I know you are." He held on for an extra second. "Go learn something," he said, and set her down. He watched her push through the school door without looking back, confident, unbothered, like she owned the hallway, and he felt that specific kind of love that has no name, the kind that feels like your heart is walking around outside your body with a duckbill hood on. He got in the truck. He had 2 hours and a plan. He drove to the library. First, it was quiet-free, and had fast Wi-Fi, and he spent 90 minutes reviewing everything he'd printed out about Sterling and Associates. The firm's history, their major clients, the kind of language their leadership used in public statements. He'd watched 3 YouTube videos of their CEO, Richard Hargrove, speaking at industry conferences. He took notes in the margin of his printout with a ballpoint pen. Hargrove was polished, calculated, the kind of man who'd built something real and knew it. Sterling wasn't some startup playing at success. It was 30 years old, employed over 400 people, and had a reputation for promoting from within. From within. That phrase had lodged in David's head like a splinter. It meant something. It meant that if he got in the door, if he just got his foot in the door, there was a path forward. Not just a paycheck. A path. He rehearsed his answers in the library bathroom, speaking quietly to the mirror, adjusting his tie, practicing the way he'd sit, and when he'd lean forward to show engagement, and how to answer the weakness question without sounding either rehearsed or genuinely broken. "My biggest weakness is that I take on too much because I have a hard time asking for help. Too on the nose. I've learned I sometimes get too invested in outcomes I can't fully control." Better, real. Something a man who'd been through what he'd been through would actually say. He nodded at the mirror. "You can do this," he said low, not performing it for anyone. He believed it mostly. He left the library at 9:15 and drove toward downtown. Sterling and Associates was on the 14th floor of the Callaway building on West 52nd, 12 minutes from the library on a good traffic day. Today was not a good traffic day. By 9:28, he was 2 blocks from the building, stuck behind a delivery truck that had parked halfway into the lane, and a cab that had decided now was the ideal moment for a U-turn. He checked the clock, checked it again. His knee was bouncing without his permission. He was going to make it. He was fine. His phone rang. The screen read, "Lily's school main office." His stomach dropped before his mind caught up. He pulled to the curb, put the truck in park, answered. "Mr. Clarke." It was Mrs. Ortega, the school secretary. Her voice was carefully calm in the way that school voices are when they don't want a parent to panic immediately. "Hi, I'm sorry to call. Lily had a little fall on the playground. She's okay. She's in the nurse's office, but she scraped her knee pretty bad, and she's very upset, and she's asking for you. She won't stop crying." He closed his eyes. 1 second, just 1 second. "How bad is the scrape?" he asked. "It's not serious, no stitches, but it's pretty raw, and she got frightened. She's asking for you, Mr. Clarke. She's pretty worked up." He looked at the Callaway building. He could see it from where he was parked. 14 floors up, his future was sitting in a conference room waiting to see if he'd show. "I'm on my way," he said. He called Sterling's front desk from the car. A receptionist answered, professional and smooth. "Sterling and Associates. How can I direct your call?" "Hi, this is David Clarke. I have an interview at 10 a.m. with the hiring team. I'm calling because I have a family emergency. My daughter was hurt at school. I'm not going to make it at 10, but I'm hoping to reschedule. Is that possible?" A pause. Typing. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Clarke. Let me check with the coordinator." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Clarke, the team has a very tight schedule today. The position has multiple candidates. I can pass along a message, but I can't guarantee a reschedule." "I understand," he said. "Please pass it along anyway." He hung up and drove to Lily's school. She was sitting on the cot in the nurse's office with her right knee wrapped in gauze, her duckbill jacket clutched in her lap, and her face red and streaked with dried tears. When he walked through the door, she looked up at him, and her chin immediately started going again. That little trembling thing it did when she was trying so hard not to cry, but couldn't help it. "Hey," he said. "Hey, I'm here." He crossed the room and crouched in front of her, and she grabbed his shoulders and pressed her face into his neck and let out a ragged little sob that she'd clearly been holding back. He held her. He didn't say anything for a minute, just held her. "It really hurt," she said against his collar. "I know. I didn't do anything. I was just running and then I fell, and it hurt so bad, Daddy." I know, baby." He pulled back and looked at her knee. The bandage was clean. No bleed through. She was fine. She was fine. "Mrs. Ortega said you're patched up pretty good." "I cried in front of everybody," she said, like this was the true humiliation. "So, crying is just your body saying it's in pain. That's not embarrassing. That's biology." She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Jalen said only babies cry." "Jalen is 8 years old and doesn't know anything about anything." A small, reluctant smile. "That's mean." "It's accurate." He signed her out for the rest of the morning, something he'd never done before. She'd have to make up the time. But he looked at her face and made the call, and didn't second-guess it. They went to the ice cream place on Mercer Street, the one with the hand-painted signs and the rotating daily flavors, and Lily got 2 scoops of mint chip in a waffle cone and sat across from him at the little table by the window and slowly, measurably, came back to herself. "You missed your interview," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. "Who told you about the interview?" "I heard you on the phone with Marcus 3 weeks ago. You were in the kitchen and you thought I was asleep." He set down his spoon. "Yeah, I missed it. Are you mad at me?" The question hit him like a fist, quiet and precise. He looked at his daughter, her mint-stained lips, her bandaged knee, her eyes watching him with the same directness she'd had since she was 18 months old, like she'd always known how to look straight through him. "No," he said, firmly, completely. "I am not mad at you, not even a little bit, not even in a direction." She studied him for a moment, deciding whether to believe it. "Promise." "On my life," he said. "There will be other interviews." He said it the way a man says something true, even when he doesn't know if it is. He drove her back to school for the afternoon, walked her in, watched the door close behind her yellow jacket. Then he sat in the truck for a while. The interview window was gone. He'd called back briefly. The coordinator had been polite but clear. The team had moved on. The position had been filled from the morning's slate. They'd keep his resume on file. On file, he put both hands on the steering wheel, stared at the school building, thought about the word healthcare the way he'd been thinking about it for weeks, like a locked door he'd been slowly working the combination on. Back to zero. He put the truck in drive. He was 2 blocks from home, stopped at a red light at the intersection of West 6th and Caldwell when he saw her. She was on the crosswalk midway across four-lane intersection, full midday traffic, and she was down. Not sitting, not catching herself on one knee. Down. Both hands on the asphalt head, hanging the way a person goes down when their body stops cooperating without any warning. Horns. A cab that hadn't seen her swerved hard. David was out of the truck before he had a decision. He was in the intersection with his hand up, palm out at the oncoming lane, the universal stop, and he was already beside her. Hey, I got you. Can you hear me? She looked up. Late 50s, maybe 60. Well-dressed, a camel-colored coat, a silk scarf that had come loose. Her face was pale in a way that wasn't natural, a cold white that had no blood behind it. And her eyes, when they found his face, were confused in the slow, frightened way of someone who doesn't know where they are. Her voice was barely there. You're okay. I've got you. Can you move with me? We need to get out of the street. I don't know what happened. That's okay. We're moving now. All right, I've got your arm. He got her up. She was lighter than he expected, and she leaned into him fully, trusting him the way you trust. The only steady thing in a room that's moving, and he walked her to the sidewalk, to the bench in front of the dry cleaners on the corner. He ran back to his truck, still idling at the red, a cab behind it starting to lean on the horn, pulled it into the nearest parking space, illegally, threw on the hazards, grabbed the water bottle from his console, and came back. She was sitting forward on the bench, elbows on knees, trying to steady her breathing. Here. He crouched in front of her and offered the water. Small sips, don't rush it. She took it. Her hands were trembling slightly. Do I need to call someone? He asked. 911. Do you have a condition? No, please don't. She pressed her free hand to her forehead. I haven't eaten today. I had a meeting this morning and I forgot. I haven't been sleeping and She exhaled. I'm all right. I think I just needed to stop. Okay, he said. Then we stop. He sat down on the bench beside her. There was no performance in it, no calculation. He just sat. He had nowhere to be anymore. The worst had already happened today. So he sat with this stranger on a bench in front of a dry cleaners on West 6th and let her breathe. After a minute, she said, Thank you. Don't mention it. You ran out into the street. The light was red. She laughed, a small surprise sound like she'd forgotten she could. She looked at him sideways. You're remarkably calm for someone who just sprinted into traffic. I've had a weird day, he said. She looked at him more carefully then, at the borrowed suit, the polished shoes, the loosened red tie. Did you have somewhere to be? I did, he said. And now? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked out at the intersection where she'd gone down. The city was already moving again the way it always did. Unbothered, uninterrupted, no record of the woman who'd been lying in the crosswalk 60 seconds ago. Now I'm here, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I'm Emily, she said. He looked over. David. She offered her hand, still a little unsteady, and he shook it. Is there someone I can call for you, Emily? He asked. Someone who can come get you. Something crossed her face at that. Something complicated and private that she pressed down quickly. Not really, she said. Okay. He didn't push it. Then we sit here until you're ready to move. No rush. She looked at him like that was the strangest thing anyone had said to her in a long time. You're very kind, she said quietly. You'd have done the same thing, he said. She didn't answer. And something about the way she didn't answer made him think that maybe she wasn't sure. They sat on that bench for 22 minutes. He got her a granola bar from the corner store, paid $1.79 for it, which was close to criminal, but he didn't comment, and she ate it slowly, color coming back into her face, her breathing evening out. They talked about nothing important, the weather turning cold, the way the city felt different in October, whether the dry cleaners behind them was any good. Easy conversation, the kind you have when neither person needs anything from the other. When she finally said she felt ready to stand, he stood first and offered his hand, and she took it, and she was steady. "Can I call you a cab?" he asked. "I have a car coming." She pulled out her phone, a slim, expensive thing, and sent a quick message. "It'll be 5 minutes. I'll wait with you." "You don't have to." "I know." She looked at him again with that look, the one he couldn't quite categorize. "The interview you missed," she said. "Where was it?" He paused. "Sterling and Associates, downtown." She nodded once slowly, like she was filing that away. "I hope something good comes of this day for you," she said. "You deserve it." He smiled, tired, genuine. "Same to you." A black car pulled to the curb. It pulled away. He stood on the sidewalk. It pulled away. He stood on the sidewalk and watched it go. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know where she'd been going or where she'd come from. He didn't know why a woman in a camel-colored coat was alone on a bench on West 6th at noon on a Tuesday with nobody to call. He only knew what he'd seen: a person who needed help. A person he'd helped. He walked back to his truck, took off his tie, folded it carefully, and put it in the glove box. Then he drove home to Lily. That night, after dinner, after the bath, after the bedtime story, the one about the rabbit who thought he was lost but had known the way home the whole time, David sat at the kitchen table in the quiet and opened his laptop. He had 3 bills due, a savings account with $214 in it, a borrowed suit hanging on the back of the bathroom door. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then his email loaded. And there it was, a new message sent at 4:47 p.m. from a sender he didn't recognize. Subject line: Sterling and Associates follow-up. His hand hovered over the trackpad. He opened it. The email was 4 sentences long. David read it once fast, the way you read something when you're afraid it'll disappear if you look too long. Then he read it again slower, his finger tracing each word on the screen like he needed to make sure they were real. "Mr. Clarke, it has come to our attention that you were unable to attend your scheduled interview this morning due to a family emergency. We would like to extend an invitation for you to meet with our team at your earliest convenience. Please reply to confirm your availability. Office of Human Resources, Sterling and Associates." He sat back in his chair. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, he could hear Lily's white noise machine, the one shaped like a cloud that Sarah had picked out 3 years ago in a Target on a Sunday afternoon when everything was still ordinary. He read the email a 3rd time. He didn't understand it. He'd called them himself. The coordinator had been clear the position was filled, they'd move on, thanks for your time. That had been at 11:15 a.m. This email had been sent at 4:47 p.m. Something had changed in those 5 hours, and David had no idea what, and the part of him that had spent 3 years waiting for the other shoe to drop was already looking for the catch. He typed back carefully, the way you answer something important, not too fast, not too eager, not desperate, even when you are. He confirmed Thursday morning. He proofread it twice. He hit send. Then he closed the laptop, put both hands flat on the table, and stared at the wall. "Okay," he said to no one, just to the air, just to whatever was listening. He went to bed. He didn't sleep much. He didn't tell Marcus right away. He didn't tell anyone, actually. He'd learned a long time ago that hope, when shared too early, becomes a liability. People get invested. They ask questions. They check in. And then when things fall apart, which they often did, you have to manage their disappointment on top of your own, and that is its own exhausting kind of labor. So he kept it close. He went to his warehouse shift Wednesday morning and pulled pallets and drank bad coffee from the machine in the break room and said nothing to anyone about the fact that the next morning he had a second chance at the only interview that had mattered in years. He did call Frank Delgado, though, because he needed the suit again. "You're kidding me," Frank said when David knocked and explained. "They called you back." "They emailed." "Same thing. That's son, that doesn't happen. I've been watching people go on job interviews since 1987, and I will tell you that getting called back after a no-show is not a thing that happens. It happened. Frank looked at him for a long moment, then stepped back from the door. Come in. I pressed it after you returned it. Fresh crease. I had a feeling. David stepped inside. You had a feeling. I had a feeling, Frank said, moving down the hallway to the closet. Because I've been watching you for 3 years, David, working doubles, picking up Lily, fixing things with duct tape and stubbornness. A man like that deserves a crease in his suit. He came back with it on a hanger covered in dry cleaning plastic. You want coffee before you go? David checked his phone. He had 30 minutes. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'll take coffee. They sat at Frank's small kitchen table, the one covered in a yellow plastic tablecloth with a fruit pattern that Frank's wife had picked out before she passed, and Frank poured 2 cups and didn't say anything for a minute. You nervous? Frank asked. Getting there. Good. A little nervous is good. Keeps you sharp. Frank wrapped both hands around his mug. What are you going to tell them about why you didn't show? The truth, David said. My daughter needed me. I left. Frank nodded, like that was the only acceptable answer. And if they push back on it? Frank asked. If they say something like what kind of employee abandons an interview for a scraped knee? David looked at him steadily. Then they're telling me exactly who they are before I ever start working for them. And I can make a decision about that. Frank smiled slow, real the kind that doesn't have anything to prove. There it is, he said. There's the man. Thursday morning, he dropped Lily at school and she grabbed his tie before he could crouch down to her level. You have the interview again today? She said. It wasn't a question. Where did you hear that? You were ironing your shirt at 6:30 in the morning, Daddy. You only iron when something important happens. He looked at her. 8 years old. His entire world wrapped up in a duck-bill jacket and too much perception for her own good. Yes, he said. I have the interview today. She straightened his tie with both hands, tugged it once, adjusted it, smoothed the front of his jacket. The focused seriousness of it nearly undid him completely. Better, she said, stepping back to appraise her work. Thank you. Don't forget to breathe, she said. Ms. Patterson says, when she gets nervous she forgets to breathe, and then she talks too fast, and nobody understands her. I'll breathe. Promise. On my life. She hugged him, quick, decisive, and pushed through the school door. He stood in the parking lot for a moment in Frank's navy suit, with the fresh crease and the red tie his daughter had straightened for him, and he breathed the way he'd promised. Then he drove downtown. The Callaway building lobby was all marble and low light, the kind of lobby that was designed to make you feel the weight of the place the moment you walked in. A security desk, banks of elevators, a directory on the wall with little gold letters, Sterling and Associates, 14th floor. He checked in at the security desk, took a visitor badge, rode the elevator up. The doors opened onto a reception area. Clean lines, navy accents, the company name in brushed steel on the wall behind the front desk. The receptionist looked up. Mr. Clarke. Yes. They're expecting you. I'll let them know you're here. Can I get you water, coffee? Water would be great. Thank you. He sat in one of the chairs along the wall and held his water and looked at the room the way he'd learned to look at rooms, not nervous, just taking it in. People moved through the space with purpose. Phones rang and were answered. Someone laughed at something in an office down the hall, easy and unguarded, which told him something about what it felt like to work here. A door opened and a woman appeared, mid-40s, dark blazer, efficient energy. She extended her hand. Mr. Clarke, I'm Diane Walsh, HR Director. Thank you for coming in. He shook it. Thank you for the invitation. I want to apologize again for Tuesday. She held up a hand, cutting him off cleanly. No need. We appreciated your call. Family first, it says something about a person's character. She gestured toward the hallway. Come on back." The interview room was a conference room at the far end of the hall oval table. 8 chairs, a window that looked out over the street below. 3 people were waiting. Diane Walsh, a man introduced as Greg Sutton Operations Director, and a woman he didn't know, named Patricia Ames, who was apparently the direct supervisor for the analyst role. They went around the table with introductions, and then Greg Sutton, a compact man with reading glasses pushed up on his head, leaned forward and said, "Mr. Clarke, I'm just going to address the elephant in the room first. You missed your scheduled interview. We called you back anyway. I'd imagine you have some questions about that." David looked at him steadily. "I do." "Ask." "My understanding from your coordinator on Tuesday was that the position had been filled. Then I received an email at 4:47 that afternoon inviting me back. I'm curious what changed." Sutton and Walsh exchanged a look, brief neutral. "We received a recommendation," Walsh said carefully, "from someone who has the ear of our executive team. They indicated they'd encountered you recently and wanted to pass along a word. They didn't elaborate on the specifics. We take those recommendations seriously." David sat with that. "Who was it?" "I'm not at liberty to say," Walsh said. "What I can tell you is that it was credible and that the position is in fact still open." She paused. "We moved one candidate forward, but the final decision hasn't been made." Patricia Ames, who had been quiet until now, looked up from the pad she'd been writing on. She was somewhere in her early 50s, sharp eyes, no wasted movement. "Can I ask you something directly? Mr. Clarke? Please. You pulled your daughter from school on one of the most important mornings of your professional life. If you're here, if you take this position, how do we know you'll be all in? That you won't be pulled in 2 directions?" He met her eyes. He'd known this question was coming. He'd thought about the answer in his truck in the library parking lot and in Frank's kitchen and lying awake the night before. "I'll tell you what I told my daughter when she asked if I was angry at her for making me miss Tuesday's interview," he said. "I'm not, and I would do it again. Every time." He paused, letting that settle. "But here's what I'd also say. The reason I want this job, the reason I'm sitting here in a borrowed suit on 2 hours of sleep is because of her. Because she deserves health care, a stable home, a father who isn't working 3 jobs and still coming up short. So yes, if my daughter is hurt and she needs me, I will go to her. But I will also work harder than any other person on your team to make sure those moments are the exception and not the rule. You won't find someone more motivated to make this work." Silence. Then Patricia Ames made a small mark on her pad and said, "Okay, just that. Okay." And they moved on. The interview ran 90 minutes. He hadn't expected that. He answered questions about his work history. Honestly, he'd been a warehouse worker and a delivery driver and a short-order cook, and he'd done 2 years at a community college before the money ran out, and he didn't apologize for any of it because you don't apologize for working. He talked about his management of logistics at the warehouse, the scheduling system he'd built from scratch that Marcus had adopted for the whole crew. He talked about how he thought about problem solving. He talked about Sterling's community development portfolio with enough specificity to show he'd done his homework, and Greg Sutton had actually sat up straighter at that. When it was over, Diane Walsh walked him back to reception. At the elevator, she said, "We have a couple more conversations to complete. We'll be in touch within the week." "I appreciate it," he said. "Regardless of the outcome, thank you for the chance." She looked at him the way Walsh had looked at him when he'd mentioned his daughter. A different kind of measurement than the professional one. "Of course," she said. The elevator doors closed. He sat in the truck for 10 minutes before driving anywhere. He ran the conversation back through his mind the way he always did, looking for where he'd come in weak, where he'd maybe pushed too hard, what he should have said differently. He found a few things. Nothing catastrophic. He had no idea if it was enough. He had no idea what recommendation had come from where or how seriously they'd weigh it against a man without a degree and a resume that had 3 different job categories in 5 years. He'd done everything he could do. The rest wasn't in his hands. He thought briefly about the woman from the bench. Emily. The way she'd filed away the name of the firm when he'd mentioned it, that small, quiet nod. He thought about it, and then he thought about how that didn't make any sense, because she'd been a stranger on a crosswalk who'd nearly passed out from skipping lunch, and he'd sat with her for 20 minutes and gotten her a granola bar, and people didn't make phone calls to executive teams over granola bars and 20 minutes on a bench. He let the thought go. He drove to pick up Lily. She was waiting at the curb with 2 other kids from her class, and when she saw his truck, she broke away from them and ran. And he saw her knee was still a little stiff, but she ran anyway because she was Lily, and she did not let things slow her down. She pulled the door open before the truck fully stopped. Well, how'd it go? Get in first. She climbed in, buckled herself, and turned to look at him fully. Her whole body aimed at him the way it always was when she was waiting for something important. It went well, he said. How well? Well enough that I think we'll know something by next week. She considered that. Did you breathe? I breathed. Did you tell them about me? He looked at her sideways. Why would I tell them about you? Because I'm your secret weapon, she said, completely serious. Ms. Patterson says that the things that make us most human are what make us most valuable. You're a dad. That's human. He stared at his daughter for a moment. Where did you get that? I read it in a magazine at the dentist. You read the articles at the dentist's office. What else am I supposed to do? The toys are for babies. He laughed, the real kind, from somewhere low in his chest, and pulled out of the school lot. I told them about you, he said after a minute. I know, she said, like she'd known all along. He went back to his warehouse shifts. He didn't tell Marcus about the interview, not yet, not until there was something definitive to tell. But Marcus, who had known David for 2 years, and watched him with the specific attentiveness of someone who genuinely wanted the other person to succeed, noticed something different in his posture that Thursday night, and pulled him aside during break. You look different, Marcus said. Different how? Like you've got something going, something good. Marcus was eating a bag of chips from the vending machine, one hand on the railing of the break room. Don't lie to me. We've been on this floor together too long. David leaned against the wall. I had a second interview. Marcus stopped chewing. Sterling. Sterling. Marcus pointed at him. I knew it. I knew something happened. How'd it go? I don't know yet. I think okay. I think maybe better than okay. What do you mean you don't know? You can always tell. I genuinely cannot always tell Marcus. Marcus waved that off. You can. You just don't trust it. He leaned forward. How'd it feel in the room? David thought about Patricia Ames saying okay and writing something down on her pad. He thought about Greg Sutton sitting up straighter. Like I belong there, he said, and then looked slightly surprised at himself for saying it. Marcus pointed again. That's it. That's the answer. If it felt like you belonged, then you did. He crumpled the chip bag. When do you hear? Within the week, they said. Okay. Marcus clapped him once on the shoulder, hard enough to mean something. Okay, then we wait. They went back to the floor. The conveyor belts kept moving. The night kept going. He heard on Friday. Not at 4:47 this time, at 9:12 in the morning, while he was standing in the kitchen in his jeans and a flannel shirt drinking coffee and reading Lily's math homework that she'd left on the table the night before. He'd been checking it out of habit the way he always did, even though her math was already better than his. His phone rang with a 212 number he didn't have saved. Mr. Clarke. This is Diane Walsh at Sterling & Associates. He set down the coffee. Good morning, Ms. Walsh. I'll get right to it, she said, and his chest went tight. In his experience, I'll get right to it was either very good or very bad, and in his experience, there was usually only one way to bet. The team completed their evaluations, and we'd like to extend you an offer. He didn't say anything for a moment. Mr. Clarke. I'm here, he said. I'm sorry, I'm here. We'd like you to come in Tuesday to go over the specifics in person, but I can give you the overview now if you'd prefer. Please, he said. We're offering you the program coordinator position, which is actually one level above the analyst role you originally applied for. The salary range is $62,000 to $68,000 to start commensurate with your experience. Full benefits package including medical, dental, and vision. 3 weeks PTO increasing to 4 at the 2-year mark. There is a performance review at 6 months. We can discuss the full details of the offer letter Tuesday morning, but I wanted you to have the headline. He was standing very still. $62,000. Healthcare. 3 weeks. He had been making $31,000 at the warehouse with no benefits, and 2 weeks he could never fully take without feeling the loss in his paycheck. Mr. Clarke, Walsh said again. I'm here, he said. I'm sorry, yes. Tuesday morning. I'll be there. He paused. Ms. Walsh, can I ask the recommendation you mentioned? When we met on Thursday, is there anything you can tell me about who made it? A brief pause. I can tell you that it came from someone with a significant personal connection to our executive team, and that they spoke about your character specifically, not your resume, your character. Another pause, and then in a tone that was slightly less HR professional than everything she'd said before. Whatever you did, Mr. Clarke, it mattered to someone. He stood in his kitchen in his flannel shirt for a long moment after she hung up. Then he walked down the hall and stood in the doorway of Lily's room, which was empty. She was at school and looked at the purple walls she'd picked out herself, and the drawings she'd taped up around the window frame, and the stuffed rabbit on her pillow that was missing one eye and had been through the washing machine so many times it had gone from white to a soft, worn gray. Sarah, he said quietly to nothing. To the room. To the air, the way he sometimes talked to her when something happened that she would have wanted to know about. I think we're going to be okay. The room didn't answer. It didn't need to. He called Marcus. It's done, Marcus answered without saying hello. It's done. Marcus made a sound, not words, just a noise, the kind of noise a person makes when something they wanted for someone else finally happens. And then, I told you if you just got in the door. You told me. Did I tell you? Yes, I did. I told you. Marcus. What? Thank you, David said. For showing me the posting. For the push. He paused. I wouldn't have applied without that. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Yes, you would have, he said. Eventually. I just moved the timeline. David shook his head, even though Marcus couldn't see it. Get back to work. I'm on break. Then enjoy your break. Oh, I absolutely am. Marcus paused. Clarke, you earned this. Every piece of it. David stood in his kitchen with the phone in his hand after they hung up, and he looked out the window at the parking lot below at the stray cat that was back on the dumpster, exactly where it had been on the morning of October 14th. Still watching something David couldn't see. He thought about the woman on the bench. Emily. He thought about the camel-colored coat, and the silk scarf, and the confusion in her eyes when she'd looked up at him from the asphalt. He thought about the way she'd said thank you, not the reflexive kind, not the polite automatic kind, but the kind that meant she'd actually looked at him and registered that something real had happened. He thought about what Walsh had said. Whatever you did, it mattered to someone. He still didn't know who she was. He hadn't Googled her. It felt strange to somehow like taking a beautiful thing apart to see how it worked. He'd helped a person. The person had helped him back in whatever way she'd been able to. That was the whole of it. Except it wasn't the whole of it. He knew that much. He just didn't know the rest yet. He picked up Lily that afternoon, and he told her in the truck right there in the school pickup lane with a minivan idling behind them and somebody's kid running across the crosswalk with a lunchbox swinging. I got the job, he said. She turned and looked at him. For real, she said. Her voice had gone very still the way it did when she was trying to contain something too big. For real. She looked at him for 2 more seconds, and then she launched herself sideways in the seat, and wrapped both arms around his neck so suddenly that he grabbed the steering wheel to keep from being pulled off balance, and she was squeezing harder than a kid her size should probably be able to, and he felt her take a breath that shook a little at the top. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you would." He held her with his free arm and said nothing because there was nothing better to say. Behind them, the minivan honked politely, and Lily pulled back and wiped her eyes fast with the back of her hand, pretending she hadn't been crying. "We should move," she said with great dignity. "Yeah," he said. "We should move." He pulled forward. He kept his hand on her shoulder for the first block. Neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was the good kind, full and warm and carrying weight, the way only the best silences do. Tuesday arrived the way big days arrive, faster than you expect, and exactly on time. David was up at 5 again, but it felt different this time. Not dread. Not the teeth-clenched holding on of a man preparing for disappointment. Something else. Something steadier. He drove downtown. He took the elevator to the 14th floor. He shook hands with Diane Walsh and Greg Sutton and Patricia Ames, and he sat down at the oval table in the conference room with the window that looked out over the street, and they walked him through the offer letter page by page. He read every line. He asked 3 questions about the performance metrics, about the benefits enrollment window, about whether the coordinator role had a defined growth track within the organization. Greg Sutton answered all 3 without hesitation, and the specificity of his answers told David something about what kind of company this was, not the kind that gave vague answers to real questions. When they reached the signature page, Patricia Ames looked at him over her reading glasses. "Any other questions?" David looked at the letter, the salary figure, the benefits section, his name printed in clean black type on the dotted line. "1," he said. "There's someone who advocated for me to be here. I don't know who it was, and I understand you can't tell me. But if there's any way, if you ever have the opportunity, I'd like that person to know that I'm going to take this seriously, that it wasn't wasted." The 3 of them exchanged a look brief and layered with something he couldn't read. "We'll pass that along," Walsh said quietly. He signed the letter. He walked out of the Callaway building at 11:07 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October, with the sun doing something complicated behind the clouds, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let the city move around him the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, running on its own schedule. He looked down the block toward the intersection of West 6th and Caldwell. The bench was there. Empty. The dry cleaners behind it had a new sign in the window. He stood there long enough to remember all of it. The horns, the pavement, the woman with no color in her face, the 22 minutes the granola bar that cost $1.79, the way she'd said his name when they shook hands. David. Like it mattered. Then he turned and walked to his truck, and he called his daughter's school, and he asked to be put through to Lily's classroom, and when the teacher brought her to the phone, she said, "Daddy," in the slightly panicked way she always did when the school phone rang unexpectedly. "I signed," he said. A beat of silence. "You signed," she repeated. "I signed." And even through the tinny school hallway phone, even with the background noise of 23 other third graders, he could hear the exact moment she smiled. His first day at Sterling and Associates was a Monday in early November, and he was 20 minutes early. He sat in the lobby on one of the Navy chairs, the same ones he'd waited in during the interview, and watched the building fill up around him. People came in 2s and 3s, coffee in hand, badges already clipped, moving with the easy familiarity of people who knew exactly where they belonged. He watched them and tried to read the room the way he always read rooms, cataloging the unspoken things. Who greeted the security guard by name? Who looked at their phones in the elevator versus who looked up? Small things. The kind of things that told you more about a place than any orientation packet ever would. Diane Walsh met him at 9 sharp, handed him his badge, walked him through HR paperwork, benefits, enrollment, the building's layout. She had a direct, unhurried quality that he appreciated. She didn't perform warmth, but it was real when it showed up. She showed him his desk on the fourth floor of the open plan operations section, introduced him to the 3 other coordinators on his team, pointed out the kitchen and the 2 conference rooms he'd be using most. His desk was clean. A new laptop still in its box. A company notebook with his name on the cover, which was a small thing and shouldn't have meant anything, but he looked at it for a second longer than he needed to. David Clarke, Program Coordinator. Patricia Ames stopped by at 9:45. She pulled a chair up to the edge of his desk without ceremony and sat down. "How are you holding up?" "Good," he said. "Taking it in." "That's the right answer for day 1. She set a folder on his desk. "Your first project brief. I'm not throwing you in the deep end. It's a client report that mostly needs reorganizing and some data verification. But it'll tell me how you think, which is what I actually need to know." She looked at him directly. "Questions are encouraged. Asking for help is not weakness here. Not on this team. Clear?" "Clear," he said. "Good." She stood. "Lunch at 12:30. The taco place on the corner is non-negotiable on Mondays. You're coming." It wasn't an invitation. He recognized that and appreciated it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She gave him a look. "Patricia, or Ames. Not ma'am. I'm 53, not 80. "Patricia," he said. She nodded and walked back to her office. He opened the laptop box. The first 2 weeks were an education in a very specific kind of humility, not the kind that diminishes you, but the kind that shows you exactly how much there is to learn and lets you decide what to do about that information. He'd been smart all his life. He knew that. Street smart systems, smart, the kind of smart that figures out how to fix a thing with whatever's available because there was never the right tool. But this was a different language. The reports, the client frameworks, the internal terminology that everyone used like it was oxygen. He spent his first week writing things down, constantly, decoding the vocabulary of a world he'd been standing outside of for 32 years. He didn't pretend he already knew things, he didn't. That was the one rule he set for himself inflexibly on day 1. He'd seen men destroy themselves doing that, building a false floor out of performance and then having to maintain it indefinitely, which was its own exhausting second job. He asked questions. He wrote the answers down. He asked follow-up questions. When he didn't understand a concept, he Googled it at his desk without embarrassment and then asked Patricia or one of the other coordinators to confirm his understanding. Kevin Marsh, who had the desk to David's left and had been at Sterling for 4 years, watched this process with something between amusement and respect. On the Wednesday of David's second week, Kevin leaned over and said quietly, "You know you're making the rest of us look bad, right? The note-taking, the questions. Half the people in this office have been here for years and still don't know what half the acronyms mean." "Why don't they ask?" David said. Kevin shrugged. "Because everyone else looks like they already know, so you assume it's just you." David thought about that. "That's a pretty inefficient system." "That's corporate America," Kevin said, but not bitterly, more like a man stating a weather forecast. David went back to his notes. He filed that away too. He moved himself and Lily to a new apartment on the 3rd weekend of November. It wasn't dramatic 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor of a building that wasn't new, but was clean in a neighborhood with a school that had been rated significantly better than Lily's current one. He'd done the math 3 times before committing. The new salary made it possible. Not easy. Nothing was ever easy, but possible, which was its own kind of miracle when you'd been living below the line of possible for 3 years. Lily walked through every room twice on move-in day, very seriously, as if conducting an inspection. "This is my room," she said, standing in the doorway of the 2nd bedroom. "That's your room." She looked at the window. It faced a small courtyard with 2 trees that had gone bare in the November cold, but would presumably do something better in spring. "Can I paint it?" "Within reason." What does "within reason" mean? It means not black. "I wasn't going to do black," she said, slightly offended. I was thinking yellow, like sunflowers. Yellow works. She nodded seriously like a decision had been made, and went back to examining the closet space. Frank Delgado had helped them move, rented a van, showed up at 7 a.m., with coffee and an energy that did not match his age, and carried boxes without complaint until noon. When they were done, and the three of them were sitting on the floor of the new living room eating the pizza David had ordered, Frank looked around the empty space with the ease of a man who was simply happy to be somewhere good. "This is nice," Frank said. "This is a nice place, David." "Still got some ways to go," David said. "Every good place does." Frank folded his pizza slice. "You know what makes a place good, though? Same thing that made your old apartment good even when it wasn't great." He glanced at Lily, who was methodically picking the mushrooms off her slice. "The people in it." Lily looked up. "Are you talking about me?" "I'm talking about you and your dad," Frank said. She considered that. "Yeah." She agreed with the total unself-consciousness of a child who hasn't yet learned to deflect a compliment. "We're pretty good." David looked at the blank walls of the new living room. He thought about sunflower yellow. He thought about a fresh start that wasn't starting over, that was building forward from the ground he'd already broken. "Yeah," he said. "We are." It was in his 4th week at Sterling that he first heard the name. He was in a Tuesday afternoon briefing, one of the full team meetings, where Greg Sutton updated the operations group on company-wide projects, and Sutton was walking them through the organizational chart for a new community development initiative the firm was launching in Q1. "This one comes directly from the top," Sutton said, clicking to a new slide. "Emily Hargrove has been leading the charge on this personally, so we can expect close oversight and high visibility, which means we bring our best." He looked around the table. Questions. David had his pen above his notebook, about to write down the project name, and he stopped. Emily Hargrove. He wrote it down slowly, looked at it. Sutton kept talking. David caught up with the rest of the meeting on autopilot, his mind doing something careful and quiet in the background, turning over the name the way you turn over a stone in a riverbed to see what's underneath. Hargrove. Richard Hargrove, Sterling and Associates CEO. Hargrove. After the meeting broke up and people filed out, David stayed in his chair an extra 30 seconds. Kevin Marsh, who had lingered to refill his coffee at the side table, glanced over. "You okay?" "Emily Hargrove," David said. "What's her role here?" "She doesn't have a role here technically," Kevin said, adding creamer. "She's on the foundation side, the Hargrove Family Foundation, which is a separate thing from Sterling but connected. She's been more active in the firm lately, though. 6 months ago, she kind of dropped off the radar for a while, and now she's back and running point on this community initiative." He shrugged. "She's the CEO's daughter, smart. Not the kind of person who uses the name for shortcuts. She actually does the work, from what I've heard. I've never personally been in a meeting with her." "What does she look like?" David asked, and then caught himself. "Sorry. That's a strange question." Kevin looked at him with mild curiosity. "50s, I think. Always well-dressed. Quiet voice. Why?" David shook his head. "Nothing. Just putting faces to names." Kevin accepted that and left. David sat alone in the conference room for a minute. Emily, late 50s, well-dressed, the CEO's daughter. The woman he'd pulled off a crosswalk on the worst day of October had been the CEO's daughter. The woman whose name he'd filed away as just Emily, just a stranger, just a person who needed help, had been Emily Hargrove. He thought about what Walsh had said on the phone. It came from someone with a significant personal connection to our executive team. Whatever you did, it mattered to someone. He sat with that. He hadn't helped her because of who she was. He hadn't known. He'd helped her because she was a person on the ground, and no one else was stopping, and the light was red, and there was not a version of himself that kept driving. He tried to work out how he felt about it, knowing now, retroactively, that the woman on the bench had been connected to all of this. He wasn't sure it changed anything. The thing he'd done hadn't changed. The reason he'd done it hadn't changed. But there was something strange about realizing that the two most significant events of October 14th, the worst day, the day he'd lost everything, and then quietly found something else had been more connected than he knew. He got up, closed the conference room door behind him, and went back to his desk. He had a report due by 4 o'clock. He met her on a Thursday in the third week of November. He didn't know it was going to happen. He was in the kitchen on the 14th floor, the main executive floor, where he'd been sent to drop off printed reports for Patricia, who had a meeting with Sutton that afternoon, and he was waiting for the elevator back down, holding the empty folder, when the door to the stairwell opened. She was in a charcoal coat today, not camel. Her hair was the same. Her posture was the same, straight, considered the carriage of a woman who had spent a lifetime walking into rooms that expected something of her. She was looking down at her phone, typing something, and she stepped into the hallway and nearly walked into him. She stopped. He stopped. She looked up from her phone, and the recognition came across her face in a wave. Slow at first, then certain. Her mouth opened slightly, and then closed. She looked at him the way you look at something you weren't expecting, in a place you weren't expecting it, with the full weight of the coincidence landing at once. "David," she said. "Ms. Hargrove," he said. Her eyes moved, a quick involuntary thing, like she was recalibrating. "You know who I am." "I found out recently. I didn't know at the time." "No," she said quietly. "I know you didn't." She looked at him for a moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not uncomfortable, more like a person looking at something they've been thinking about and are now seeing clearly for the first time. "You work here." "4 weeks now, program coordinator." He paused. "I know what you did. I know you recommended me. I don't know how to properly—" "Don't," she said, not unkindly. She looked almost uncomfortable, which surprised him. "Please don't thank me." "Why not?" "Because then it becomes a transaction," she said. And it wasn't. She held his gaze. "What you did on that street, you didn't know who I was. You didn't have any reason to stop. You just stopped. And that—" She paused, and something moved across her face, something older and heavier than the moment. "That means more than I can explain to you right now." He looked at her carefully. "Are you all right? You seemed like something more than just skipped lunch." She was quiet for a moment. The hallway was empty around them, the kind of institutional midday quiet where a building breathes without anyone noticing. "I was having a difficult time," she said finally. "I'd been having a difficult time for a while. That day it was a particular low point." She said it plainly, without performance, the way someone says something true when they've decided not to keep carrying it alone. Sitting on that bench with a stranger who had every reason to be somewhere else and chose to stay anyway? She stopped. "It's a small thing from the outside, but things don't have to be large to change something." He nodded. He understood that better than most people. "How are you now?" he asked. "Better," she said. And then, more carefully, "Working on it." A door opened down the hall, and 2 people from the executive team came out. Mid-conversation, noticed Emily and shifted into professional mode. Immediately nods, brief acknowledgments. She returned them smoothly, the effortless code switching of a person who had grown up in this world. When they passed, she looked back at David. "Are you settling in all right?" she asked. "The work, is it a fit?" "Yes," he said. "More than I expected." He paused. "Patricia Ames is formidable," Emily said. "I was going to say excellent." "Also true. She's the best person in this building. I've told my father that for years." She almost smiled. "She'll push you hard." "Good," he said simply. Emily looked at him for a moment. "I'd like to talk to you properly sometime," she said. "Not in a hallway. I'm leading the community initiative that launches in Q1, and I've been looking at the coordinator team, and I think there may be a role for you in some of the early framework work if you're open to it." He kept his expression even professional. "I'm open to it." "Good." She shifted her coat over her arm. Give it another few weeks. Get your footing. I'll have my assistant reach out." "Thank you," he said. She started to move past him toward the elevator bank. Then she stopped and turned back. "David." "Yeah." "Your daughter," she said. "Is she okay?" "Her knee." He blinked. She had remembered that the detail he'd mentioned in passing 22 minutes on a bench 6 weeks ago. "She's good," he said. "She's great. She picked yellow for her room." Emily looked at him with an expression he still couldn't fully categorize. "Yellow's a good choice," she said. The elevator opened. She got in. He rode the next one down to his floor, sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and stared at the screen for a moment before his brain came back online. Kevin Marsh, without looking up from his own screen. "You look like someone just told you something in a foreign language, and you mostly understood it." "Something like that," David said. Kevin glanced over. "Good foreign language or bad foreign language?" "Good," David said. "Definitely good." December came in cold and fast, the way New York Decembers do, and David learned the rhythms of the job the way you learn any new language imperfectly. At first, then, with increasing fluency, the stumbles becoming less frequent, the moments of genuine ease becoming longer. He was good at the logistics of it, the frameworks, the data, the client-facing documents that required both precision and clarity. Patricia told him at his 6-week check-in that his instincts were strong and his execution needed polish, which was the most useful kind of feedback honest about the gap, without pretending the foundation wasn't there. "You see the whole system," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Most people at your level see their corner of it. You see how the pieces connect. That's not something we can teach you. Either have it or you don't." She folded her hands. "So the question is whether you're willing to do the technical work to match the instinct, because right now they're not even, and that's a gap." "I'm working on it," he said. "I know you are. Kevin tells me you've been here until 7 twice this week. Kevin talks too much. Kevin is worried you're working yourself to the bone." She looked at him evenly. "Are you?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I'm catching up. There's a difference." "There is," she agreed. "As long as you know which one it is." He did. He was genuinely all right tired in the good productive way, not the hollow running on fumes way he'd lived in for 3 years at the warehouse. This exhaustion had traction to it. It was going somewhere. Still on Patricia's gentle insistence, he started leaving by 6. Lily noticed the change before he named it. She noticed it the way she noticed everything quietly at an angle without making a production of it. One evening in December, she was sitting at the kitchen table, doing her homework, while he made dinner, and she looked up at him and said, "You seem different." He was stirring pasta. "Different how?" "Lighter," she said. Like it was just a fact no bigger than noting he'd gotten a haircut. Like something heavy came off. He thought about that. Some things did. "The money stuff." He glanced at her. "Partly." She went back to her homework. After a minute, she said, "Mom would have liked the new apartment." He kept stirring. He let the sentence sit for a moment without rushing to answer it the way he'd learned to do when she brought Sarah up, not flinching, not deflecting, just making space. "Yeah," he said. "She would have. She always wanted a second bathroom." Lily giggled, small, genuine. "She said we needed a second bathroom because you left the toothpaste on the counter." "I left the cap off the toothpaste," he corrected. "Different crime. Same result." Lily looked back at her math sheet. "She would have been really happy," she said softer now. "Not just about the bathroom." He turned the burner down. He looked at the back of his daughter's head, her hair in 2 lopsided ponytails, because she'd done them herself that morning, the way she always insisted on doing them herself. "Yeah," he said. "She would have been happy." They ate dinner and talked about Lily's new school. She'd been transferred in the 2nd week of November, and David had spent a week anxious about the transition, and Lily reported with the authority of someone who has fully assessed a situation that her new class was better than her old one, that her teacher Ms. Brewer was strict but fair and knew all her students' names by the third day, which Lily considered a mark of professional excellence, and that there was a girl named Amara who had the exact same duck backpack, and therefore they were already friends. Identical backpack, David said. That's a strong foundation. Stronger than most things, Lily said completely seriously. He laughed into his water glass. The email from Emily's assistant came on a Monday morning in the second week of December. It was brief and professional, a request to schedule a meeting with Ms. Hargrove regarding the Q1 Community Initiative at his convenience, 15 to 30 minutes. He confirmed for Wednesday afternoon. He told Patricia because it felt wrong not to. She already knew, of course she did, and her only response was, "Don't try to impress her. Just think clearly and speak plainly. She doesn't have patience for performance." "Noted," he said. "And David." Patricia looked at him from the doorway of her office. "This is a good thing. Whatever comes of it, it's a good thing. Don't overthink it." He had some practice at not overthinking things. He applied it. The meeting was in a small conference room on the 14th floor, not the big oval one, a quieter one off the side hallway with just a round table and 4 chairs and the late afternoon light coming through the window sideways. Emily was already there when he arrived 2 minutes early, which meant she'd been there earlier than that. She stood when he came in, and they shook hands the way they had on the bench, real, not ceremonial. "Sit down," she said. "Thank you for making time." Of course. She had a folder in front of her legal pad beside it. She looked rested compared to the woman on the bench. There was color in her face now, and the careful, slightly distant quality she'd had in the hallway 3 weeks ago had softened into something more present. "I want to be straightforward with you about why I wanted this meeting," she said, "because I think you're the kind of person who prefers that." "I am," he said. "The initiative I'm leading is focused on employment programs for under-resourced communities, specifically adults, between 25 and 45, who are working entry-level positions they're significantly overqualified for because they've had no pathway into professional roles. People who are smart and motivated and have been essentially locked out." She looked at him directly when she said this without any self-consciousness about the parallel. "I want to build a mentorship and placement framework that actually works, not a box-checking exercise that looks good on a report. And I need people on the project team who understand what that population actually experiences. Not academically. Actually." He held her gaze. "You want someone who's been in it?" "Yes." "And you think that's me?" "I know that's you," she said. "You were working a warehouse job at midnight, and you were the most qualified person in that building. You applied for an entry-level analyst position with skills that exceeded the role by a significant margin. You know what it feels like to be on the other side of the door." She paused. "I don't. I grew up on the inside. I can study it, I can research it, I can talk to people about it, but I can't know it from the inside. You can." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table, then back at her. "What would the role look like?" he said. "Alongside your regular coordinator responsibilities, this would be additional, not replacement. Bi-weekly meetings with the project team, input on the program design, review of the outreach materials to check them against real-world experience. Eventually, if the program pilots successfully, I'd want you involved in the rollout." She opened the folder. "Your manager has already approved the time allocation. This would be formalized in your responsibilities, not informal." He looked at the papers she slid across the table. The program outline, the scope, the population it was designed to serve, the exact population he'd been part of 4 months ago. He thought about Marcus, about the parking lot at 1 a.m. applying on his phone with grease on his fingers, about the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a hand reaching. "Okay?" he said. "Okay, yes," she said. "Okay, yes," he said. "I'm in." She nodded, not surprised, but settled the way someone looks when something falls into place, the way they hoped it would. "Good," she said. They spent the next 40 minutes going through the program framework. She asked smart questions and listened to the answers without performing listening, which was rarer than it should have been in rooms like this. He told her 3 things that were wrong with the current design directly without softening them, and she wrote all 3 down and didn't defend the original draft. When the meeting ended and they stood to shake hands again, she said, "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it the right way." "All right." "What happened in October? The bench, the granola bar, the 20 minutes. She looked at him steadily. "I was not in a good place that day. Clinically, I mean. I'd been managing something difficult for a while, and I was losing ground. Sitting there with someone who had no reason to stay and stayed anyway, it sounds like a small thing. But it wasn't a small thing for me." She paused. "You didn't fix anything. I want to be honest about that. You can't fix a person in 20 minutes on a sidewalk. But you reminded me of something I needed reminding of, that people are essentially decent when they choose to be. That basic kindness is still real." She stopped. "I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to," he said. "You already did." She shook her head slightly. "I got you a job interview." "No," he said. "You reminded someone I was worth looking at. The rest, that was on me." She was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough," she said. He walked back to his desk. Kevin Marsh, timing it perfectly, swiveled his chair. 40 minutes. Kevin? That's a long 15 to 30. Kevin. I'm just saying. Go back to your report, David said. Kevin grinned and turned around. David sat down, pulled up his laptop, and opened the file he'd been working on before the meeting. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. Outside the window, the city was doing what the city always did, moving indifferent, enormous, full of people going somewhere. And for the first time in longer than he could precisely name, David Clarke was one of them. Not running from something, not holding on, just going somewhere, with a plan, with purpose. The program had a name by January: Pathway Forward. It wasn't David's name. It had come out of a brainstorming session with Emily's team in the second week of December. But when he heard it for the first time in a meeting, something in him settled around it, like it had always been there. Pathway Forward. Simple, direct, no pretense. He'd written it on the top of his legal pad and underlined it once, and Patricia, sitting beside him, had glanced over and said nothing, which from Patricia meant she agreed. The first full project meeting was the first Thursday of January on the 14th floor in the big conference room with 8 chairs. Emily ran it with the same quality David had noticed in their one-on-one present, unhurried, asking real questions and writing down real answers. The team was 6 people: Emily, David, a data analyst named Jess, who talked fast and thought faster, a communications lead named Rob, who had the careful, considered energy of someone who chose every word twice, Patricia as an advisor, and a young woman named Carla Torres, who had been brought in specifically as a community liaison. She'd run a workforce development nonprofit in the Bronx for 7 years, and had the kind of clear-eyed pragmatism that only comes from working directly with people whose problems are not theoretical. David liked Carla immediately. She said what she meant, she pushed back when something was wrong, and she had no patience for solutions that looked good in a report and fell apart in practice. In the first meeting, when Rob presented a draft outreach strategy that relied primarily on social media, Carla put down her pen and said flatly, "That's going to miss the people who actually need this. The 40-year-old guy working a double at a warehouse doesn't have time to be on Instagram looking for job programs. He gets information through word of mouth, through his church, through the guy at the bodega who knows everybody's business." She paused. "We need to be in those rooms, in person." Rob looked slightly stung. David said, "She's right." Emily looked at him. "Tell me more." "When I was at the warehouse," he said, "the only reason I knew about Sterling was because Marcus, my crew lead, showed me the posting on his phone during a break. He'd heard about it from someone else. There was no direct line from me to Sterling. There never is for people at that level. It's always someone in the middle, someone they already trust. He looked at Carla. What she's describing, the church, the neighborhood networks, that's the actual pipeline. The social media strategy is fine for amplification, but it's not where the people are. Rob wrote something down. Emily wrote something down. The meeting shifted. At the end, when people were gathering their things, Carla fell into step beside David in the hallway. "How long have you been here?" she asked. 2 months, he said. She looked at him sideways. "You don't talk like someone who's been here 2 months. I spent a lot of years thinking about the problems this program is trying to solve," he said, just from the other side of them. She nodded once, slow and certain. "Yeah," she said. "I figured." They rode the elevator down together, and she told him about the nonprofit, about the families she'd worked with, about the specific, particular difficulty of helping someone believe a door is open when every door they've ever walked toward has been locked. He listened, the way he always listened, all the way, in no part of his attention held back. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, they had exchanged numbers and made a plan to meet for coffee the following week to talk through the outreach strategy in more detail. "You know," she said, pushing through the lobby door, "you're going to be good at this." "I'm trying," he said. "No," she said. "I mean, you're actually going to be good at this. There's a difference between people who work at a problem and people who are built for it." She looked at him directly. "You're built for it." He held the door for a woman coming in behind them, reflex without thinking. Carla watched him do it and smiled to herself just slightly and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. His 6-month review came in late April, and Patricia scheduled it for a Friday afternoon, which he'd come to understand meant she expected it to be substantive. She didn't do substantive on Monday mornings, when everyone was still finding their footing. He sat across from her in her office, which was neat in the precise way of someone who processes chaos very quickly and doesn't let it accumulate. She had his review document in front of her, 2 pages, and she turned it face down immediately, which he'd also come to understand meant she wasn't going to read from it. She was going to talk to him. 6 months, she said. 6 months, he said. How do you feel? He thought about answering that carefully, and then decided against careful. Like I belong here, he said. And like I still have a lot to learn, both things at the same time. That's the right answer, she said. Both things should always be true for anyone worth keeping. She folded her hands. Your technical work is significantly stronger than it was in November. The Q4 client report, the one for Meridian Group, that was your best written work so far. Clean, well argued, you caught 2 errors in the underlying data that nobody else flagged. That matters. Thank you. Your work on Pathway Forward has been particularly noted. Emily has said, and I'm quoting directly, that your input on the program design has been more valuable than any other team members because you combine lived experience with structural thinking. That's not a common combination. She paused. I agreed with her. He looked at her steadily. I appreciate that. Now. She uncrossed her hands. Things you need to work on. You are still sometimes too quiet in rooms where you should be speaking. You have the right answer in your head and you wait. I've watched you do it. You wait to see if someone else says it first, and when they don't, you offer it too late or not at all. That's a habit you need to break. He knew this about himself. He'd known it since the first team meeting when he'd sat on an observation for 20 minutes, and Kevin had eventually said something adjacent to it less precisely and gotten the credit. Why do you do that? Patricia asked. Do you know? He thought about it honestly. Because I'm still not entirely sure my voice belongs in certain rooms, he said. I know that's not rational, but it's there. It's not irrational, she said. It's conditioned. You spent a long time in environments where speaking up had no upside. You're still calibrating. She looked at him. But here in this specific company, on this specific team, your voice belongs. I'm telling you directly, so there's no ambiguity. Your voice belongs in every room you're invited into, and in some rooms, you should be inviting yourself. She leaned slightly forward. Start doing that. It's not arrogance, it's participation. He nodded. Okay. Salary adjustment goes into effect next month. We're moving you to $66,000, the high end of your range which you've earned. She said it the way Patricia said most things, plainly without drama, as if good things were allowed to simply be stated. Any questions? 1, he said. The Pathway Forward pilot launch is in June. I've been thinking about the mentorship component. We designed it so the mentors are experienced professionals paired with program participants. But I think we're missing something. Tell me. Peer mentorship, he said. People who went through the program and came out the other side. Not just professionals who've always been professionals. People who crossed from one side to the other and can speak to both. He paused. Because the credibility gap is real. When someone who's never been where you are tells you it's possible to get out, you hear it, but you don't entirely believe it. When someone who's been exactly where you are tells you the same thing, you believe it on a different level. Patricia was quiet for a moment, looking at him. Write it up, she said. Get it to Emily before the end of the month. I will. She stood. He stood. She extended her hand across the desk, which she'd never done before, and he shook it. 6 months, she said again, and this time it meant something different. Not a marker, a foundation. 6 months, he said. He told Lily about the raise over dinner that night. She was eating her chicken and listening to him with that particular full-body attention that meant she understood this was significant, even if she was still working out the precise significance. 66,000, she repeated. Yes, she chewed. Is that a lot? It's more than we had, he said, which means we can do a few things we couldn't do before. Her eyes sharpened. Like what? Like the summer reading program at the library you mentioned. And I was thinking about signing you up for art classes, the ones at the community center on Saturday mornings. Art classes, she said with such restrained excitement that it was almost painful to watch. If you want them. I've wanted them since 3rd grade, she said with the tone of a person who has been patient for an unreasonably long time. You never told me that. I didn't want you to feel bad that we couldn't afford them. He set down his fork. He looked at his daughter, 9 years old now, her birthday in March. The gap in her front teeth finally filled in with something permanent. He looked at her and felt the specific love and grief of a parent who realizes his child has been quietly protecting him. Lily, he said, I need you to tell me when you want things, even if you think we can't afford them, even if you're worried about my feelings, because I need to know what you need so I can work toward it. Okay? She looked at him seriously. Okay? Promise. On my life, she said, using his own phrase back at him with perfect precision, and the corner of his mouth went up despite himself. Art classes, he said. Saturday mornings. Done. She allowed herself one full, unguarded smile. Then she picked up her fork and went back to her chicken like the matter was settled, which it was. In May, 6 weeks before the Pathway Forward pilot launch, everything nearly fell apart. The problem was funding. Specifically, a key corporate sponsor who had committed $200,000 to the pilot had quietly pulled out. The news came on a Tuesday morning via a terse email to Emily, which Emily forwarded to the project team with a single line. Call at 2 p.m. All hands. David was at his desk when the email hit. He read it twice. Then he sat back and thought, not with panic, but with the focused problem-solving part of his brain that he'd trained for years on problems that had real consequences, not theoretical ones. The 2 p.m. call was heavy. Emily was controlled, but the strain was visible in her voice, not distress, more like a person lifting something heavier than expected and refusing to show it. She walked them through the gap. Without the $200,000, the pilot would have to cut the mentorship component and reduce the cohort from 40 participants to 15. Which, as Carla put it, immediately guts the thing. A 15-person pilot at half capacity doesn't prove anything worth proving. "So what do we do?" Rob asked. Silence on the call. David had been writing on his notepad since the call started. He looked at what he'd written. He'd made 3 columns: alternative funding sources, timeline adjustments, structural reductions that could absorb cost without gutting impact. He'd been doing this kind of triage in his head since 2 a.m. for 3 years. The instinct was bone deep. "Can I walk through something?" he said. "Emily, go ahead." "We don't need to replace the full $200,000 in a single source," he said. "That's been the assumption since the gap opened, but it's not the only structure. If we go after 3 to 4 smaller sponsors at $50,000 each, the ask is lower, the relationship is less high stakes, and we actually diversify the funding base, which makes the program more stable long-term." He paused. "I have 3 companies in mind that have existing community investment commitments. 2 of them have relationships with Sterling already on the operations side. The ask is a natural extension of what they're already doing." He heard typing on the call. "Second thing," he said, "the mentorship component doesn't have to be a budget line if we restructure it as volunteer-based for year 1. I'm not talking about unpaid exploitation. I'm talking about identifying people who want to be involved, who see value in the program, and formalizing their participation as a commitment rather than a contract. That removes roughly $40,000 from the operating cost and gives us a story to tell future funders about community buy-in." More typing. "Third," he said, "the timeline. We push the launch 4 weeks. Use the additional time to lock the alternative sponsors. It's still Q2, just late Q2. Better to launch right than launch incomplete." The call was quiet for a moment. Carla's voice. "The volunteer mentor model are there. People willing to do that." "I'll personally make 10 calls this week," David said. "I know people. Not from this world, from the other side. People who made the crossing and would give anything to help someone else make it. I'll find the mentors." Emily's voice quieter than usual. "David, the 3 companies you mentioned, do you have contact names? Give me 48 hours and I will." "Okay." A beat. Everyone else comments pushback. Carla. "I think it's right." Rob. "The 4-week delay is actually better for communications. I've been behind on the outreach materials, and this buys me the window I needed." Jess, the data analyst. "Diversified funding is structurally smarter. I've been nervous about single-source dependence since December." Emily. "Then we move forward with this plan." David, "Your point on the sponsor outreach and the mentor recruitment." Carla, "I need you to rebuild the participant intake timeline for a late June launch." Rob, "The communications overhaul starts now." A pause. "We've got this. Get to work." The call ended. Kevin Marsh, who had been sitting near enough to hear David's side of the conversation, turned his chair slowly. He didn't say anything. He just looked at David with an expression that was equal parts impressed and something that had no name, but that felt like recognition. "Don't," David said. "I didn't say anything." "I can hear you not saying it." Kevin turned back to his screen. "I'm just noting," he said very casually, "that you just saved 120 people's jobs and 40 future participants' lives in about 11 minutes. "The plan still has to work," David said. "It'll work," Kevin said with a certainty that David appreciated, even if he couldn't fully share it yet. He picked up his phone and started making calls. The first call was to Marcus. "I need a favor," David said when Marcus picked up on the second ring. "Name it." "I'm working on a job placement program, real one, not a nonprofit that disappears in a year. We need mentors. People who've worked the floor, worked the warehouse, worked the jobs that don't have business cards, and made it to the other side. People who can talk to the participants in a language that means something." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "How many?" "I need 10 to start. Eventually more." "When?" "I need commitments by end of next week." "Done," Marcus said without hesitation. David paused. "You didn't even ask what it involves." "Clarke," Marcus said. You just described every person I know who got out and wanted to reach back in. You could ask them to climb a fence, and they'd ask what time. We've been waiting for someone to ask. A beat. Email me the details. I'll have names for you by Friday. He had 12 names by Wednesday. The second hard call was to a woman named Grace Okafor, who ran a community center in Washington Heights and who Carla had connected him with in February during the outreach planning. Grace had the no-nonsense precision of someone who'd been doing real work long enough that she could smell the difference between genuine initiative and institutional optics from 20 feet away. "Tell me exactly what you need," Grace said when David explained. "And tell me what participants actually get out of it. Not what the brochure says, what they actually get." He told her. He told her about the job placement framework, the skill development component, the salary range of positions the program was targeting, the corporate partners already committed, the mentor network they were building. He spoke for 8 minutes without stopping, and when he finished, Grace said, "Are you the person who's going to be in the room when something goes wrong? Not your boss. Not Emily Hargrove. You." "Yes," he said. "Why should I believe that?" "Because 6 months ago, I was in the warehouse," he said. "And the only reason I'm not still there is because someone showed me a door. I'm not building this program from the outside. I'm building it from both sides." Grace was quiet. "Send me the program spec," she said. "If it holds up, I'll give you the community center for recruitment events. And I'll make 4 calls on your behalf by the end of the week." "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Do the work first." He did. By the 3rd week of May, 2 of the 3 alternative sponsors had committed. The 3rd was in final conversations. The mentor cohort stood at 19 people, 9 more than they'd originally planned for. The launch date was confirmed for June 24th. Emily called him directly on a Thursday afternoon, not a team call, just her and him. "I want to say something," she said. "All right." "What you did over the last 3 weeks, the sponsor work, the mentor recruitment, the Grace Okafor connection, none of that was in your job description." "The program needed it," he said. "That's not my point," she said. "My point is that you didn't wait to be asked. You saw the problem, you mapped the solution, and you executed. That's not coordinator work." She paused. "I've been talking to my father." He kept his expression neutral, even though she couldn't see him. About your role going forward. After the pilot launch, there's a position we've been trying to define for the foundation side, something between program development and community partnerships. We haven't been able to hire for it because we couldn't find the right person." Another pause. "We found them." He was quiet. "David," she said, "I'm talking about a significant step up. Director level eventually. We'd start you as senior manager community programs with a clear growth track. New salary band team of your own to build. The work would be exactly what you've been doing for the last 3 weeks, but formalized, expanded, and resourced." She paused. "But I wanted to ask you before anything formal because I think you deserve to have a conversation before you get an offer letter." He stood up from his desk, walked to the window, looked out at the city below. Kevin Marsh, respecting something in his posture, did not swivel his chair. "Can I ask you something honestly?" David said. "Please." "Is this because of the bench? Are you doing this because you feel like you owe me something?" The line was quiet for a moment. "No," Emily said, and then more carefully, "That's not the right question. The right question is, would I be making this offer if we'd met professionally first, if I'd just seen your work here over the last 6 months without the personal context?" She paused. "And the answer is yes, unequivocally. The bench is why I looked at you first. But your work is why I'm calling you now." Her voice was clear and certain. "Those are 2 different things, and I want you to believe the second one." He looked out at the city for a moment, at the street below, at the crosswalk on the corner where 2 people were waiting for the light to change. "I believe it," he said. "Good. she said. Then yes, he said. I'm in. A beat of silence, and then Emily said something he hadn't expected. Thank you. For what? For saying yes, she said. For being someone worth saying it to. He took Lily to dinner that night. Not their usual spot, not the pizza place on Mercer, but the Italian restaurant on Franklin Street that they'd walked past twice, and that Lily had said with pointed wistfulness both times smelled incredible. He made a reservation at 6:30. He put on a real shirt. He didn't explain why. She figured it out approximately 45 seconds after they sat down in the way she always figured out everything by watching him. Something happened, she said. Something happened, he agreed. Good or bad? Exceptionally good. She set down her menu. She gave him her full attention, both hands in her lap, the way she sat when she was taking something seriously. Tell me. He told her about the meeting, about the role, about Emily's call, about senior manager community programs and what it meant and what it would involve and what it could become. He told her all of it plainly and directly, the way he always talked to her, not simplified, not softened, because she had never needed either. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment. You're going to help people like us, she said. That's the idea, he said. People who need a door, she said. Yes. She looked at him with something in her face that was older than 9 and entirely her own. Sarah's clarity, his steadiness, something that was neither of them, and purely Lily. Daddy, she said. I think that's the most important job there is. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Yeah, he said. Me too. The waiter came and they ordered. Lily got the pasta with butter and cheese, which she would have gotten at any restaurant in any price range on earth. And David got the risotto. And they ate and talked about her art class, and about how Amara had gotten the same yellow raincoat as Lily. And was this a pattern or a coincidence? And about Frank Delgado, who was coming for dinner Sunday, and who Lily was planning to make cards for because she'd decided he was family, which David agreed with entirely. He paid the check. He helped Lily into her jacket. They walked out into the May evening, the city warm and loud around them, the street smelling like someone's open window and cut grass, and the hot metal smell of the subway vent on the corner. Lily slipped her hand into his the way she'd done since she could walk. Can we come back here? She asked. Yeah, he said. We can come back here. They walked to the car. The city kept moving around them, enormous and indifferent, and full of everything. And David Clarke walked through it with his daughter's hand in his, and the quiet, settled certainty of a man who has finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Not because nothing could go wrong, but because he knew now in a way he hadn't known a year ago that he could handle what came. That he'd already handled the worst of it. That the man who'd sat in a library bathroom rehearsing interview answers in a borrowed suit was still him. That version wasn't gone, wasn't erased, wasn't something to be ashamed of. He was the foundation of everything that had been built since. He was the reason the rest was possible. He squeezed Lily's hand. She squeezed back, not looking up, just registering it. I'm here. I know we're good, and they walked on. The Pathway Forward pilot launched on a Tuesday morning in late June in a rented community space in the Bronx that Grace Okafor had arranged a clean wide room with folding chairs and 6 round tables and a projector that Rob had tested 3 times the day before and that Carla had tested a 4th time at 7:30 that morning because she trusted processes and not projectors. David arrived at 7. He didn't need to be there until 8:30. He came anyway. He set up chairs. He helped carry in the box of program packets that Jess had printed and organized by participant name alphabetical, each one with a folder and a notepad and a pen. Small things. The kind of things that told a person before anyone said a word that someone had thought carefully about them being there. By 9:00, 38 of the 40 accepted participants had arrived. 2 had work conflicts that couldn't be resolved. Carla had already rescheduled intake conversations with both of them for later in the week. The 38 who came in that morning ranged in age from 26 to 44. They were warehouse workers and home health aides, and delivery drivers, and night shift security guards, and a woman named Denise, who had been managing the inventory system for a grocery chain for 6 years, with no title and no benefits, and who had, she said during her intake, been doing the job of 3 people for the pay of 1. David stood at the back of the room during Emily's opening remarks, arms folded, watching the participants' faces. He watched the moment when Emily said plainly without theater that Pathway Forward wasn't charity, that it was a bridge, and that the participants had already demonstrated the most important qualification for crossing it. They'd shown up. Every person in that room had been working sometimes 2 jobs and had still found the time to apply to interview to be here on a Tuesday morning in June. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. He watched a man in the 3rd row, mid-30s, work boots, a crease in his shirt that said he'd ironed it carefully that morning, take a slow breath and reset his shoulders. Like something had been put down. David knew that breath. He'd taken it himself. Marcus was there as a mentor. He'd come in a button-down shirt that David had never seen before, which meant he'd bought it for the occasion, which meant more than Marcus would ever say out loud. He was paired with 3 participants in the logistics and operations track, and within 20 minutes of the first small group session, David could hear him from across the room, not loud, but fully present, leaning forward over the table, talking with his hands the way he always did when he was saying something real. "The thing nobody tells you," Marcus was saying, "is that the skills you have, the actual skills, the problem solving, the keeping a system running when it shouldn't, be skills those transfer. They just don't have the right language yet. We're going to work on the language. The skills are already yours." David moved away before Marcus could catch him listening. He had his own group. His group was 4-people operations and program development track. A man named Jerome, 39, who had been a shift supervisor at a fulfillment center for 8 years and had applied for management positions 14 times without a callback. A woman named Paulette, 34, who had a natural gift for logistics that her current employer had benefited from without ever formally recognizing or compensating. A young man named Trey, 27, who was working 2 part-time jobs because he couldn't find a single full-time position in his field, and who had the tight, braced energy of someone who had been told no. So many times he now flinched slightly before the answer came. And Denise, the woman with the grocery chain inventory job, who had bright, watchful eyes and a legal pad already covered in notes. He sat down with them and looked around the table and said, "I'm not going to tell you how this works from the outside. I'm going to tell you how it works from where you're sitting, because that's where I was sitting 14 months ago." Trey looked up. "Where were you?" "Warehouse, night shift, 1-bedroom apartment with a water stain on the ceiling and about $200 in savings." He paused. "Single dad. No degree. 3 different job categories on my resume in 5 years." The table was quiet. "And now you work here," Jerome said slowly. Not a question. "Processing. Now I'm building this program," David said, "which means the door exists. I'm not telling you it's easy. I'm not telling you the system isn't broken in real ways that aren't your fault. Both things are true. The system is harder than it should be, and there is a path through it." He looked at each of them in turn. "My job is to help you find your version of that path. Not my version. Yours." Denise tapped her pen on her notepad. "What's the first step?" "Tell me what you're actually good at," David said. "Not what your job title says you do. What you're actually good at that nobody has put a name to yet." She didn't hesitate. "I see the whole system," she said. "When something's wrong in the inventory chain, I see it 3 steps before anyone else does. My manager thinks it's luck. It's not luck." "No," David said. "It's systems thinking. That's a skill with a name and a market value and a career track." He picked up his pen. "Let's start there." The day ran until 4. When the last participant left and the volunteers were stacking chairs and collecting name tags, Grace Okafor found David near the door and shook his hand with both of hers. "You built something real," she said. "We built something," he said. She gave him a look that said she knew the difference between who had carried the most. "You built something real," she repeated and moved on. Carla appeared beside him. She had her jacket over her arm and her bag on her shoulder, and the expression of someone who was exhausted in the specific satisfying way that only comes from doing something that mattered. "How was your group?" "Good," he said. "Really good. Jerome's going to be a problem." She raised an eyebrow. "Problem how?" "Problem in that he's got enough experience and intelligence that in 6 months he's going to outgrow every entry-level position we're targeting for him. We need to think bigger for him up front." Carla considered that. "Denise too. She's not entry-level. She's just been labeled that way." "Yeah," he said. "Exactly." They stood for a moment in the emptying room. Marcus waved at David from across the space, the full-arm wave he used when something had gone well, and David raised a hand back. Emily was at the far end of the room in conversation with Grace, and David watched her for a moment. She was nodding at something Grace set her legal pad in her handwriting. She'd been on her feet since 8 that morning. She'd talked to every single participant at some point during the day, not a sweep, not a meet and greet, actual conversations with her full attention. She looked up and found David watching, and she crossed the room. "Well," she said. "It works," he said simply. She looked at him for a moment. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised," he said. "Just, it's different seeing it work in a room full of people than it was building it on paper." He paused. "It's real now." "It was always real," she said. "I know. But now it looks like what it is." She was quiet for a moment, and he could see something moving in her face, something she was deciding whether to say. "I started therapy in November," she said. It came out direct and unguarded the way she said things when she'd decided to say them. "I should have started years ago. My father had been saying it for a long time. I wasn't ready." She glanced at the room, at the chairs and tables, and the ordinary evidence of something that had happened here today. "What you said on the bench that day, you said I'd have done the same thing. Stop to help. I've been thinking about that for months." She looked back at him. "I'm not sure it was true. I think I would have kept walking. I think I was the kind of person who kept walking and told myself I was too busy to stop." She paused. "I'm trying to become someone else." He looked at her. "You organized a program that's going to change the trajectory of 40 people's lives. In its first year, you think that's someone who keeps walking?" She didn't answer right away. "That's the program," she said. "You built the program," he said. "We built it." "Emily." He said it steadily. "Take the thing you made. You're allowed to." She looked at him for a moment, with the expression he'd seen before, the one he'd never been able to fully categorize, and then she laughed soft and real, and shook her head slightly. "You're remarkably direct for someone who spent the first 3 months here waiting to see if his voice belonged in the room." "I'm working on it," he said. "You're past working on it," she said. He was home by 6:30. Lily was in the kitchen doing her summer reading. She'd picked a book about a girl who builds her own boat, which David considered on brand, and she looked up when he came in and read his face the way she always read his face. "It went well," she said. "It went well," he said. She closed the book on her thumb to hold her place. "Tell me about the people." He sat down across from her at the kitchen table, the new one, the one with 4 chairs instead of 2 that they'd bought in March, when Lily pointed out that Frank came for dinner often enough that he deserved his own chair, and he told her. He told her about Jerome and Denise and Trey and Paulette. He told her about Marcus in his new button-down shirt talking with his hands. He told her about the man in the work boots in the 3rd row who had taken the breath. Lily listened with the book closed, now both elbows on the table. "They're going to be okay," she said when he finished. "The people in the program. A lot of them are," he said. "Not all of them, that would be a promise I can't make. But a lot of them." He looked at his daughter. "We gave them a door. What they do with it is theirs. She thought about that. That's what somebody did for you. That's what somebody did for me, he said. And then you did it for other people. That's how it works, he said. She considered this with the full seriousness she brought to anything that mattered. So it keeps going, she said. Like a chain. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. Exactly like that. She nodded once decided and opened her book again. I think that's the best thing a person can do, she said without looking up. Make the chain longer. He sat at the kitchen table with his daughter doing her reading in the yellow-walled apartment that was theirs, and he thought about chains the one Marcus had started when he showed him a job posting on a phone in a parking lot, the one Emily had extended when she'd made a phone call. She didn't have to make the ones being built right now by 38 people who had walked into a room in the Bronx that morning with their shoulders braced against the no and had walked out with something different in their posture. He thought about Sarah, not with the old weight, the grief that had no floor, with something quieter, more settled. Gratitude. The specific gratitude of a man who had loved someone well and been loved back and was still here, still carrying it forward, making something out of it. He thought about the morning of October 14th. The water stain on the ceiling shaped like a reaching hand. The alarm he hadn't needed. The suit on the back of Frank's closet door. Lily straightening his tie with both hands, concentrating, taking it seriously. He thought about the intersection at West 6th and Caldwell. The horns. The asphalt. A woman in a camel coat who had looked up at him from the ground with confusion in her eyes. The 3 seconds it had taken to decide. 3 seconds on the worst morning of his adult life. 3 seconds that cost him nothing he couldn't afford to lose and gave him everything that had come after. A month after the pilot launch, Jerome was offered a logistics coordinator position at a mid-size supply chain company that had partnered with the program. He called David on a Wednesday afternoon, and David could hear in the 1 second of silence before Jerome spoke the exact quality of that silence, the held breath kind, the still processing kind, the kind David knew personally. They want me to start in 2 weeks, Jerome said. Benefits start day 1. That's a strong offer, David said. How do you feel? Another silence shorter. Like I don't know what to do with myself, Jerome said. Which I think means it's real. It means it's real, David said. Take the offer. Yeah. A breath. Yeah, I'm going to take the offer. Good, David said. And Jerome, when you're on the other side of this a year from now, 2 years, someone's going to need what you've got. Don't keep walking. Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then, I hear you. I know you do. Denise got her offer 3 weeks later, a supply chain analyst role 2 levels above what the program had originally mapped for her at a company that had specifically requested her after reviewing her program portfolio. She came into the Sterling offices to sign her mentorship completion paperwork, and she stopped at David's desk on her way out. She stood there for a moment, legal pad in hand, and said, I was going to say thank you, but that doesn't feel big enough. Then just go do the job, he said. That's big enough. She left. He watched her go. Kevin Marsh without turning from his screen. How many is that now? Jerome and Denise this week, David said. 11 total from the pilot cohort. Out of 40. Out of 40 in 6 weeks, David said. The others are in process. Kevin turned around fully. He looked at David with the expression he'd had on the day the Pathway Forward funding had nearly collapsed, and David had walked into the call and rebuilt the structure in 11 minutes. The expression that had no name, but felt like recognition. You know what you are, Kevin said. Don't, David said. I'm just Kevin. Someone who belongs here. Kevin finished simply, not performed, not flattering, just accurate. David looked at him for a moment. Yeah, he said. I know. On a Saturday morning in September, he took Lily to her art class, the same one they'd been going to since spring, the one at the community center on Franklin Street. He sat in the hallway outside the studio on the wooden bench the way he always did with his coffee and his phone, because she preferred he not watch through the glass, which she had explained was because she was still learning, and learning required privacy. He sat on the bench and he looked at his phone, and he thought about nothing in particular, which was itself remarkable, that he could sit somewhere and not be braced, not be calculating, not be running numbers in the back of his head. Just sitting. Just coffee. Just the sound of his daughter's voice from inside the room, talking to the instructor about something he couldn't make out. His phone buzzed. Emily. Pilot numbers are in from Q3 review. 27 placements out of 40 participants. Average salary increase 40% over previous employment. Board approved full program expansion for next year. Wanted you to hear it from me first. He read it twice. Then he typed back 27. That's 27 people. 3 dots, then 27 people. And counting. He put the phone in his pocket. The studio door opened, and Lily came out with paint on her left hand, yellow, the same color as her walls, and a painting held carefully with both hands still slightly wet at the edges. She held it up for him. It was their apartment building done in bright, slightly wobbly lines, the windows, the courtyard, the 2 trees that had grown leaves by now the front door. Childlike in its proportions, but entirely confident in its color choices. The sky an improbable orange-pink, the trees a vivid green, the building itself a warm gold. "What do you think?" she said. He looked at it for a long time. "I think it looks like home," he said. She tilted her head, looking at it herself. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I was going for." He stood up, took the painting carefully by the edges, the way she'd taught him, and they walked out together into the September morning, the air sharp and clean, the city doing what the city always did. And David Clarke walking through it exactly as he was, a man who had once sat at rock bottom on a Tuesday in October, and chosen in 3 seconds without thinking to do the decent thing, and had discovered that decency given the right conditions has a way of coming back to you tenfold. Not because the universe runs on fairness. It doesn't, and he knew that better than most. But because the people you stop for remember it. Because kindness leaves a mark that survives the moment. Because a man on the worst morning of his life had run into traffic with his hand up and pulled a stranger off the ground, and that stranger had looked up and seen him, actually seen him, and had not forgotten. Some things don't need an explanation. Some things just need to be done. He had a daughter who painted the sky orange because she thought it looked better that way, and a job that put doors in front of people who had stopped believing in doors, and a community of people who had his back the way he had theirs. He had built this, all of it, one choice at a time from the ground up, starting from the only foundation that had ever been reliable, the kind of man he'd decided to be. And that more than the salary, more than the title, more than any of the extraordinary things that had followed the most ordinary act of grace, was the thing he was most certain of. He knew exactly who he was. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.